Alright, so a lot of people are currently in the same position as I am, where you own a 2018 iPad Pro and you don't know whether or not you should spend the extra money to get the M1 iPad Pro, or you should save about $100 and get the iPad Air, which has 256 gigabytes of storage. Now, I don't think anyone really considers the 64 gigabyte model for students like us, because the 64 gigabyte model maybe a little bit too little for us, because we download like games, we share video files, we share documents, and that might eat up the storage over time if we were to really use this device long term. So today I'll be comparing the iPad Air 2022 model as well as the iPad Pro 2018 model. I'll also reference a little bit of the M1 iPad Pro to tell you guys whether or not it is worth the extra $100 upgrade. So firstly, before we talk about all the comparison, let's do a little unboxing of the iPad Air 2022. Without further ado, let's jump straight to the unboxing. Alright, so for the comparison, I'll be splitting it into three different sections. Firstly, I'll be talking about the pricing of all three iPads. Next, I'll talk about the display of the iPad Air 2022 versus the iPad Pro 2018. The reason why I won't touch the M1 is because both of them have the exact same display. Thirdly, I'll be talking about the features between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro 2018 and tell you guys whether or not it is worth the M1 chip and losing some of the Pro features that the 2018 iPad Pro has. Alright, without further ado, let's jump straight to the pricing of all three iPads. Okay, so firstly, the iPad Air 2022 starts at $879 for the 64 gigabyte model, and it jumps up to $1,099 for the 256 gigabyte models. Spend an extra $100, so for $1,199 you get the M1 iPad Pro for 128 gigabytes of storage, which I think for the most part is enough for our students. And then if you want to save some money, for $800 to $900 you get around a relatively new iPad Pro 2018 on Carousel. So yeah, trust me if you want, or trust the seller that it is a good iPad Pro to use. Or if you already own a iPad Pro 2018 and you just want to consider between the iPad Pro 2021 model with the M1 chip versus the iPad Air 2022 with the M1 chip, then I would say, is it really worth spending that extra $100? Let's find out. Okay, let's talk a bit about the display. So the display of the iPad Air 2022 is a 10.9-inch 60Hz panel compared to the iPad Pro, which has a 120Hz panel. Now, how that differs depends on you. If you ask me, I personally would prefer the 120Hz display just because of how versatile, how useful it is for me, and I can tell the difference. Now, what that means is that when I am, let's say, gaming or just scrolling through content on YouTube or on Google searching for stuff that I need to research on, the 120Hz display really does play a part in making everything feel more smooth. However, if you can't really notice the difference, I would say the 120Hz is not really worth the $100 upgrade, and you probably don't need to spend an extra $100 on the iPad Pro. However, if you do think that 120Hz is necessary, then the $100 is necessary for you. So honestly, it is based on what you need. Oh, a side point is that drawing wise, for me, I personally couldn't tell the difference, but for artists, professional artists out there, if you can tell the difference, do let me know in the comment section below. But for now, as what I try, and as you can see in the video when I slow it down, there's only a slight minute difference. It may be a huge difference for professional artists, but as for my eye, I couldn't really tell too much of a difference. Okay, let's talk about the features between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. So the iPad Air has the M1 chip inside, and the iPad Pro has the A12X for the 2018 model. So the iPad Air also has a 2-speaker system compared to a 4-speaker system on the iPad Pro 2018. For the 2021 iPad Pro with the M1 chip, it does have an additional camera at the back and also a LiDAR scanner. And that's pretty much it for all the features on the iPad Pro. Now, if you ask me whether or not a 2 additional speaker system is worth it, and a 120Hz display is worth it, and an additional camera and a LiDAR scanner is worth it, I would say no, because firstly, the 120Hz display for most of you guys, I don't think you would ever see the difference. But okay, if you're a gamer, then fine, spend the extra $100 on the M1 iPad Pro. Secondly would be the cameras and the LiDAR sensor. Honestly, who even records video on the iPad? Nobody does, so the extra camera is useless. Next would be the 2 additional speakers on the iPad Pro. Personally, for me, I don't really see too big of a difference, but if you really want the full experience when it comes to watching Netflix or watching YouTube videos, then for sure, go ahead and spend the extra $100 for the M1 iPad Pro. Now, if you're upgrading from the 2018 iPad Pro, is it really worth it to upgrade to the iPad Air? Personally, for me, I wouldn't, because firstly, you lack the 120Hz display, you lose your 2 speakers. Yeah, that's about it. So yeah, you lose these 2 key important features, and that's what I feel defines the iPad experience, which is content as well as the 120Hz display, which makes everything feels faster. So for me, if you are coming from a 2018 iPad Pro, I would say don't get the iPad Air, just spend the extra $100 and get the iPad Pro with the M1 chip. However, if you don't need the M1 chip, I would say stick with your current iPad Pro, wait for the new iPad Pro and see what new features Apple comes up with, and maybe then you can decide which iPad is suitable for you. Okay, finally, I want to address something, which is the authentication when it comes to logging into your iPad. So the iPad Air uses Touch ID versus the iPad Pro, which uses Face ID. Now, in terms of this, I would say the iPad Air is better because right now, during the pandemic, we're still wearing masks and Face ID doesn't really work when you're out in the public. So most people use their iPad at school, and in school you do need to wear a mask. So the Touch ID is a better authentication method because you don't really have to type in the password every time you log in to your iPad. Okay, finally, for the conclusion, if you currently have a 2018 iPad Pro, I would say spend the extra money, don't get the Air, get the Pro with the M1 chip, and you'll be satisfied because you will lose out on the 120Hz, and you'll lose out on Face ID, and you'll lose out on the extra speakers, which when you bought the 2018 iPad Pro, you definitely want all these features. However, if this is your first iPad and you want to get an iPad which is solid enough for your whole student life and you think it will last you throughout the years, I would say grab an iPad Air 2022 with the M1 chip, because with the M1 chip it does also come with 8GB of RAM, so that is definitely going to give you a lot of headroom for the next 6 to 7 years of software updates with Apple, and you certainly will be able to live with your iPad for a super long time, and you do not need to upgrade for a very long time. If you haven't used an iPad Pro before, then you won't really know what 120Hz is, and you wouldn't really miss the additional speakers, because honestly, if you haven't used an iPad Pro before, the 2-speaker system on the iPad Air is already good enough for content viewing. So if you haven't used an iPad before and you want to grab your first iPad for your student life, and then I would say go for the iPad Air 2022. However, if you currently own a 2018 iPad Pro and you want to upgrade, I would say either grab the 2021 iPad Pro with the M1 chip, or wait out for the new iPad Pro, which Apple will eventually come out sooner or later. Okay, that's all for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you do subscribe to this channel, turn on the bell notification icon, like this video, and I shall see you guys in my next video. Take care and goodbye.